The world often believes that a superpower's strength lies in its arsenal, nuclear warheads, aircraft carriers, or space-age weapons. But there is something even more formidable: monetary control. And the United States didn't conquer the world through war. It did it with a system called the petrodollar. This isn't just a financial term. It's a masterstroke of global influence, allowing the U.S. to dominate economies without launching missiles or raising armies. It's an invisible empire, built not on occupation, but on the one thing every country needs to survive and grow: energy paid for in U.S. dollars. The petrodollar isn't a separate currency. It's a system where countries can only purchase oil using U.S. dollars. No matter what your national currency is, if you want oil, you need dollars. This creates a relentless, global demand for the U.S. dollar. In essence, America doesn't just sell oil, it sells access to oil. And by controlling that access, it gains something even more valuable than oil itself: financial leverage over the entire world economy. This is how the U.S. turned its currency into the backbone of global commerce, and its most powerful geopolitical tool. There is no form of power more silent and absolute than controlling the world's medium of exchange. When every nation needs dollars to keep its economy running, the U.S. doesn't need to invade. It only needs to maintain the system it designed. This is the pinnacle of soft power, a financial architecture so pervasive that it turns allies and rivals alike into participants of the same monetary empire. The petrodollar became the invisible force that fuels America's dominance, not through fear, but through necessity. Now imagine a system where you print the currency, earn it through oil sales, and then receive it back through foreign investment. That's the genius of the petrodollar. The U.S. gets to fund its military, pay off deficits, and expand globally, without asking for permission, loans, or approval. It's not just financial engineering, it's monetary supremacy. And that's why every time a nation questions the petrodollar or proposes selling oil in another currency, the response from Washington is swift and fierce. Because to challenge it is to challenge the very spine of American power. The petrodollar system isn't just about forcing countries to use dollars for oil. It goes much deeper. When oil-producing nations receive U.S. dollars from oil sales, they don't simply store the cash. They invest it back into the U.S. through bonds, stocks, and financial assets. This creates a closed-loop financial cycle known as petrodollar recycling. Every time oil is traded, dollars flow back into American markets. It's a genius strategy. America supplies dollars, sells weapons or services, and then gets that money returned, earning interest along the way. It's not just a trade system, it's a perpetual funding machine. This mechanism acts like a printing press on steroids. As oil transactions grow, so does global demand for dollars, and in turn, the inflow of foreign capital into the U.S. The result? America enjoys a constant stream of cheap credit, loaned to itself. No other country has such privilege. While other nations hustle to earn or borrow foreign reserves, the U.S. merely prints its own, knowing the world will need it. It's the ultimate loophole, issuing currency that doubles as a global asset, then receiving it back as low-cost, long-term capital. Take Saudi Arabia, for example. It sells oil for billions of dollars, then buys U.S. Treasury bonds. In financial terms, it's lending money to the U.S. government. But unlike traditional borrowing, the U.S. doesn't plead for loans. It receives them as a byproduct of energy trade. And because treasuries are considered one of the safest assets, oil-rich nations are happy to invest. Meanwhile, the U.S. pays minimal interest and retains dominance over global liquidity. It's the world's most elegant and least understood credit loop. While developing nations scramble for IMF funding, face strict conditions, and pay high interest rates, the United States enjoys uninterrupted access to global capital. Like a magnet pulling iron filings, every oil transaction funnels dollars back to Wall Street and Washington. And in doing so, it empowers America to finance military operations, invest in innovation, and project influence without resorting to austerity or dependency. This isn't just smart economics, it's a masterclass in monetary statecraft. The petrodollar turned America into both issuer and borrower, lender and beneficiary, all at once. But perhaps the petrodollar's greatest strength isn't how much money it generates, it's what it allows the U.S. to avoid. No need for export surpluses, no need to be a manufacturing powerhouse. As long as oil is sold in dollars, America doesn't need to produce. It just needs to ensure the world keeps playing by its rules. That's why any suggestion of pricing oil in euros, yuan, or gold gets met with geopolitical resistance. Because challenging the petrodollar is like pulling the thread that holds the entire empire together. Before the petrodollar, global finance was anchored to something tangible: gold. Under the Bretton Woods system, every currency was pegged to the US dollar, which itself was convertible to gold. This gold standard ensured stability but limited how much money could be printed. For the US, this became a problem. As it expanded its global footprint after World War II, its ambitions required more money than its gold reserves could support. America needed a way to fund wars, rebuild allies, and maintain dominance without being handcuffed by metal locked in vaults. In 1971, everything changed. The US unilaterally ended the dollar's convertibility to gold, a shock to the global monetary system. Suddenly, the dollar was backed by nothing but trust. While this move gave America the ability to print freely, it also threatened global confidence in its currency. The dollar, once a symbol of stability, now floated in uncertainty. The US urgently needed a new anchor to maintain its financial supremacy. That anchor wouldn't be found in Fort Knox. It would be found beneath the sands of the Middle East. In 1973, the world was hit by an oil shock. Arab nations imposed an embargo, driving oil prices sky high and plunging the West into crisis. But in every crisis lies an opportunity. For the US, this was the moment to reinvent its monetary foundation. If the dollar couldn't be tied to gold, it could be tied to oil, a commodity just as valuable, even more essential. And thus, a new vision emerged, one where global energy trade would be permanently priced in US. By 1974, this vision took form in a secretive yet transformative agreement between the US and Saudi Arabia. The terms were simple but monumental. Saudi Arabia would sell oil exclusively in US dollars and reinvest the revenue into US assets. In return, the US would provide military protection and political support. No public statements, no official documents, just quiet, mutual understanding that would reshape the global economy. This wasn't just a trade deal, it was the birth of the petrodollar era. Once Saudi Arabia agreed, other oil-producing nations followed. At the time, only the US had the strength, militarily and economically, to guarantee their security. Trust in American might became the foundation for petrodollar loyalty. From this point forward, oil and dollars were inseparable. America no longer needed gold to back its currency. Oil had become the new reserve. This unspoken alliance built a financial empire where global energy demand sustained US supremacy. The petrodollar wasn't just a clever policy, it became the backbone of modern monetary hegemony. Once the petrodollar was in motion, the world had no choice but to follow. To buy oil, the lifeblood of every modern economy, nations needed US dollars. And to get those dollars, they had to either export to the US, borrow them, or stockpile reserves. This created a hard reality. The entire global economy became dependent on a currency controlled by one single country. The US wasn't just issuing money, it was issuing access. The petrodollar turned the dollar into more than a medium of exchange. It became a tool of global submission. At that point, the US effectively became the world's central bank. Every decision made by the Federal Reserve or Treasury Department, interest rate changes, stimulus packages, bond purchases, triggered ripple effects across the globe. A policy decision in Washington could crash Asian stock markets, devalue Latin American currencies, or ignite inflation in Africa. This wasn't governance, it was economic gravity. America didn't just influence, it dictated. And that's the unspoken consequence of a petrodollar-based system. Power is centralized, and every other nation becomes a node on the American financial network. The irony? The very countries trapped in this system are the ones keeping it alive. They hoard dollars as reserve currency, use it for foreign debt, and structure their trade policies around it. Over time, the dollar wasn't just linked to oil. It became entwined with global trust, an involuntary trust, born not from loyalty, but necessity. Every oil deal, every major trade contract, every cross-border loan, all flowed through dollars, through the American system. And that dependency became the silent leash of US dominance. Strategically, this was financial colonization on a planetary scale. The US didn't need to invade countries or topple governments to control their economies. It simply needed to control the currency they relied on. When a nation becomes dollar-dependent, it forfeits a portion of its economic sovereignty. The petrodollar didn't just build a monetary empire, it turned the global economy into a chessboard where America held the queen. And checkmate was never more than one interest rate hike or sanction away. The petrodollar isn't just a financial structure, it's a geopolitical weapon. Since nearly every oil transaction requires US dollars, and thus banking infrastructure, Washington effectively controls global access to energy trade. Any country that steps out of line risks being cut off, isolated, and financially suffocated. Sanctions, asset freezes, and banking bans aren't just diplomatic tools, they're direct hits to a nation's economic lifeline. This isn't soft power, it's surgical coercion. Through the petrodollar, America doesn't need soldiers to win battles. It can devastate economies with the stroke of a pen. No tanks, no drones, just Treasury Department memos and swift network blacklists. Nations like Iran, Venezuela, and Russia have faced the full force of this financial warfare. Once excluded from dollar-based systems, their economies spiral. Inflation soars, trade halts, currencies collapse. The world watches and takes notes. The lesson? Defy the US monetary order, and you risk economic exile. The petrodollar doesn't just reward compliance, it punishes rebellion. It's the invisible battlefield where entire nations can be brought to their knees without a single missile launch. And it's not just the sanctioned who feel the heat. Other countries, fearing similar punishment, self-regulate their behavior. They tread carefully in diplomacy, avoid antagonizing Washington, and align trade policies to US expectations. This creates a chilling effect across the global stage. Nations begin censoring their own ambition to preserve access to the dollar. It's a deterrent far more effective than any military base. The petrodollar turns obedience into survival, and global finance into a system of silent compliance. But all weapons carry weight. The more the US uses the dollar to punish, the more it motivates others to escape its reach. Countries begin exploring alternative payment systems, creating regional currencies, and forming alliances that bypass the dollar altogether. The very power that made the US untouchable is now provoking a global response. Petrodollar supremacy is still intact, but cracks are showing. And those cracks are not just theoretical, they're strategic fault lines that could reshape the world economy. To keep the petrodollar system alive, the US must ensure a steady global supply of dollars. And the simplest way to do that? Run massive trade deficits. The US buys more than it sells, pumping dollars into the global economy. This ensures there's always enough currency in circulation to fuel oil transactions. But it also means America imports heavily, producing less domestically. It's a strategic trade-off. Global dominance in exchange for weakened manufacturing and rising dependence on foreign goods. Petrodollar strength comes at the cost of industrial erosion and long-term economic imbalance. The consequences ripple through the American heartland. Factories shut down, jobs are outsourced, and communities once built around industry are left behind. While the petrodollar empowers the US globally, it quietly hollows out its economic core. Cheap imports flood the market, but wages stagnate. Wealth concentrates, inequality widens. The working class bears the cost of monetary supremacy. It's a paradox. A nation that controls the world's currency, yet loses control over its own economic foundation. Power abroad, instability at home. That's the hidden toll of petrodollar leadership. Moreover, global dollar demand forces the US to issue more debt. Every treasury bond sold is a promise to pay tomorrow for dominance today. While many countries gladly buy this debt, it adds up. The US now holds the largest national debt in history. Though foreign buyers recycle oil dollars into American bonds, the mountain of liabilities grows. The irony? The system that brings unlimited credit also brings perpetual obligation. America may borrow in its own currency, but it's still borrowing against the future, and betting that the world won't stop playing its game. This is the great contradiction of the petrodollar. It grants unparalleled global power but creates deep internal vulnerabilities. The US doesn't have to produce more or export more. It just needs to maintain dollar dominance. But that reliance breeds complacency, deindustrialization, and debt addiction. The longer the game is played, the higher the stakes become. If global demand for dollars ever drops, the backlash could be swift and severe. The petrodollar has built an empire, but it also strapped a financial time bomb to its core. No system of dominance lasts forever. Cracks are beginning to form in the petrodollar empire. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are actively developing ways to trade oil using local currencies instead of the US dollar. China is championing the petro-yuan, while Russia and Iran have already begun accepting payments in euros and yuan. These aren't isolated incidents, they're coordinated moves to escape dollar dependence. A new monetary order is emerging, and it's one that could eventually dethrone the dollar. The world is no longer asking if the petrodollar will be challenged. It's asking when. At the same time, America's weaponization of the dollar has triggered caution worldwide. Countries now realize that reliance on USD also means vulnerability to sanctions, blacklists, and coercion. In response, new financial ecosystems are forming. China's CIP system, digital currencies, and regional trade blocs are just the beginning. Nations are creating backup plans, ways to bypass the dollar if needed. What started as economic self-defense may soon evolve into a full-fledged alternative system. Sovereignty is being redefined, not by armies, but by payment platforms and currency choice. Even Saudi Arabia, the cornerstone of the petrodollar, has signaled interest in accepting other currencies for oil. Though still in early discussions, this shift is symbolically huge. If Saudi breaks ranks, the system weakens. The more countries diversify away from the dollar, the less control the US retains. Losing petrodollar dominance wouldn't just hurt America's economy, it would reshape its entire geopolitical posture. For the first time in decades, the question isn't just how the US maintains control, but how it adapts if it loses it. As the world transitions to renewable energy, solar, wind, hydrogen, the role of oil as a strategic resource begins to fade, and with it, the foundation of the petrodollar weakens. Yet that doesn't mean the US will lose its status overnight. The dollar still dominates reserves, global trade, and financial infrastructure. Its trust is deeply embedded in markets. But make no mistake, the throne is shaking. A future where energy isn't tied to oil, or oil isn't tied to dollars, means the US must either reinvent its strategy or risk watching its monetary empire slowly unravel. If the petrodollar collapses, the US won't just lose easy credit, it will lose its most subtle and effective tool of global influence. Military power may still matter, but financial command will slip. Debt will grow harder to manage, and foreign policy will face new constraints. Still, in that challenge lies opportunity, to build a more resilient, balanced economy not based on privilege, but on innovation and trust. The real question isn't how long the petrodollar lasts, it's whether America can evolve before the world moves on without it. The petrodollar is more than a financial system, it's the invisible engine behind American power. But no empire lasts forever. As the world evolves, so too must the foundations of influence. The future won't be ruled by who prints the most money, but by who adapts fastest. Energy is shifting, currencies are diversifying, and trust is migrating. The petrodollar may have won the past, but the next chapter belongs to visionaries who build with purpose, not privilege. The age of automatic dominance is ending, and what rises next will be written by those bold enough to rethink everything.